Hello there, welcome back to the channel. Now there's many unresolved questions in Star Trek. This is for many reasons. One, and I think the most important reason, is we only see a tiny snippet of what is actually going on in the galaxy. As repeated in previous episodes, the galaxy is a big place. Space is big. You just won't believe how vastly, hugely, mind-bogglingly big it is. I mean, you may think it's a long way down the road to the chemists, but that's just peanuts to space. There, I finished the full quote. As I said, space is big, and that's the main reason we don't really see. Starfleet is just one force in the galaxy, and one ship which we normally follow around. Voyager, the Enterprise, whatever. One crew, the Cerritos, whatever. We don't really see. We see little bits of what's going on in the background. Now, Starfleet of the 22nd century, which is what we're focusing on, is a much smaller entity. But there are still a vast, huge number of civilian ships, sublight ships, low warp vessels. We see actually a fair number of them in Enterprise, as they did a pretty decent job of showcasing some of these vessels in the background. But the fact remains, we only see a tiny bit of what is going on. And that is a reason for some of the unanswered questions. Now, I've done a video before about where exactly was Starfleet when the Xindi weapon came. They were expecting the Xindi. And I've seen many different explanations, but quite recently I came across a Reddit post, which is 9 years old. It's pretty old, you can't even comment on it anymore, where down the thread, they came up with a pretty decent explanation, which is quite frankly better than mine. And it was originally by the Daystrom Institute. And we're going to discuss it because I think it makes a lot of sense put in the context of the universe. So let's just go a quick revisit of exactly what happened. Who are the Xindi? Why was there an issue? Right. So basically, in the 2150s, Earth is attacked by this probe that just appeared in orbit and opened fire. And although comments are made that even if the Vulcans hadn't been holding humanity back and trying to tie their hands a little bit, they might have been able to do something about it. Reality is, I don't think Starfleet of the 24th century, unless they saw that probe coming, would have been able to do much about it. Although I do think Starfleet of the 24th century would have seen the probe coming. Starfleet didn't know who had attacked them. They recovered the probe and they recovered the pilot, but it was of an unknown species even the Vulcans didn't recognize. Okay, so Archer is contacted by the Zulabon and their benefactor from the future, and he tells them that it was a race called the Xindi who live in the Delphic Expanse. Now, Starfleet of the time only has one ship capable of making the journey, the prototype NX class. Now, obviously, Starfleet doesn't know what to do in this situation. They defer to the Vulcans, and they say basically procrastinate and wait, and we'll figure it out. Archer is convinced of what is happening, and we hear him say, what we've got to lose, one ship? Now, we do know Starfleet has many other vessels because in that moment we'd seen 3 of them. The Enterprise was not Earth's first starship. It was Earth's first Warp 5 starship. We know about vessels like the Franklin. And we do know that the captain of the Franklin, Graal, to give him his newer name in the future, that timeline in the Kelvin universe, the history of this period is part of their history as well. It only diverged when the Romulan mining ship, the Narada, came back and caused a diversion in the timeline. So he mentions the Xindi Wars and the Romulan Wars. And he was not aboard Enterprise. So that implies that he fought the Xindi. Or at least Starfleet was made ready to deploy them. By the way, a lot of this is contained within the Reddit post. So we fast forward a little bit. Enterprise is sent into the Expanse. It discovers the Xindi were behind it, and eventually the probe is launched, a new weapon capable of destroying an entire planet, which is just taking a step back a second. Do you know how much energy it would take to destroy a planet the size of Earth? That thing must have been monstrous. What kind of power? What was powering it? I mean, damn. Anyway. And I always like to think it would have more sundered the Earth rather than utterly obliterated it, but, you know, let's move on from that detail. The weapon is launched and it arrives in orbit of Earth, and there is not a single Starfleet vessel there to intercept it. They fight it with one Xindi ship and one Andori and Kumari class warship, which arrives because it was able to track somehow the Xindi moving through. And whether Shran contacted Starfleet or not is unknown, but they were the only thing stopping it. And other than that, Earth had no real orbital defenses that we see. Most of the defenses would have been on the ground, the military and other emplacements, basically preparing for a type of war the Xindi were not waging. So where exactly was Starfleet? Where were all of Starfleet's ships and assets? Especially when we hear it mentioned that there was the Xindi War. Now, I heard in the post the conversation go down two different trains of thought. One was diversionary tactics by the Xindi. The reptilians and the insectoids were seen to go rogue. The reptilians went into the past and tried to create a weapon without the consent of the other Xindi. It's entirely conceivable with how aggressive and impulsive the reptilians and insectoids were that perhaps both or one of them, probably more likely I think the insectoids, might have been launching diversionary attacks on other Earth outposts and colonies. Now, Starfleet ships are not quick, so in order to properly deploy they would have had to have them already out there. Likely, my theory had originally been Starfleet would have simply been waiting near the edges of the system and been further out trying to intercept something coming in, but I don't think they're that stupid in sort of hindsight. They knew the probe came out of a vortex. Although communications with Enterprise had been spotted, they likely knew that that's how the Xindi got around. So they would have known they're going to drop straight out of a vortex near to Earth, not a couple of light years away or a few light years away. But if the Xindi were launching secondary attacks on other worlds like the Vega colony, it would have forced Starfleet to redeploy assets to try and protect them. And with only limited forces and no help from Vulcan or even Andoria, other than Shran's Kumari class, then they probably didn't. They were probably stretched pretty damn thin in this time period. And remember, the Enterprise is the only Warp 5 ship. Columbia wasn't finished yet. It wasn't even space-worthy. So it likely didn't even have an engine. So it wouldn't have been able to move to do anything. And so the Xindi turn up. They destroy a space station, but yet nothing is launched. No fighters, no missiles, nothing comes up from Earth. The best explanation I've got, which is in this post I quite liked, was the fact that Starfleet, if it was suffering diversionary attacks from the Xindi, might have anticipated an attack somewhere else and moved forces to deal with it. That combined with the fact that the Vulcans did not believe the Xindi were responsible purely because of where Archer got the information from someone who claimed to be from the future, and the Vulcans didn't believe time travel was possible, so therefore they didn't think it was likely. Even in Starfleet Command, in Earth's government, there was division. They weren't entirely convinced, at least at first, that the Xindi were responsible. This could have meant that Starfleet would likely have been still investing assets and resources into chasing down other leads and potential enemies. And if the Vulcans were encouraging that, it might have forced Starfleet to redirect forces that might have been there for the defense of Earth away. The few ships that were likely at Earth, because again, space is big, Earth is a big planet, there likely were other starships in orbit of Earth or around that were seeing the Xindi probe turn up, but those vessels might have been unarmed civilian ships or very lightly armed freighters or something of that nature, not something that could stand up to a Xindi warship plus that weapon. They probably wouldn't have been able to damage it even if they could get past the Xindi warship that was protecting it. So they might not have they probably wouldn't move to intercept or do anything. They might have just tried to retreat and wait for Starfleet. Starfleet did send ships. We do know this. Now, assuming that when the Enterprise was sent back in time by Daniels in the next breath, basically after all this was done and the Xindi weapon was destroyed, it was returned to the same moment that it left. There was a massive force of Starfleet and other allied ships there. It's likely that fleet was on its way back to Earth when the weapon was deployed. As soon as it appeared, Earth's tracking stations would have detected it and Starfleet Command would have ordered its ships back. Those ships, plus maybe Vulcan vessels in the area, would have moved to intercept. They were simply too far away to actually do anything for the battle. So basically it would have been too little too late if it wasn't for the Andorians. But those ships were there, and assuming they were all relatively in range, Earth did have a defense fleet there. It was just scattered at the edge of the system or just outside the system in small squadrons or in individual patrols or as one big marauding force maybe, but they weren't there. As I said, this isn't my particular speculation. It is one down a Reddit thread that I came across. It is entirely beta canon, but it does seem to fit the narrative. It fits the information we have from Balthazar Edison or Graal. when he mentions the Xindi wars and the fights and the battles, it implies that there was more conflict. Now, I have heard alternative theories about that Kelvin timeline, that it's an entirely separate universe in the first place. It's not even the original universe isn't even the same universe as the Prime Universe. And that there was a rippling effect to the time travel that may have altered events in the past as well as in the future. I'm not getting into that because that's wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey, headache-inducing fun. But we're not going to talk about that. Let's assume for the moment that those events are canonical to the Prime timeline, which they've always said they should be. And is even mentioned when canonized in the Prime timeline in later future events in the 32nd century by Temporal Agent Daniels, or Kovich, whatever you want to call him, then what Edison is referencing were at least some minor engagements somewhere with other Xindi forces that were either probing Earth's defenses or attacking Earth outposts to soften Earth up and divert resources away. Although you have to wonder how stupid Starfleet would have been, because Admiral Forrest wasn't that dumb to move all their assets away from Earth when they knew the weapon was coming and not assume that these were diversionary tactics. That's just me. Anyway, as I said, this was not originally entirely my theory. I just really liked it. I like the idea that the Xindi were launching these secondary assaults. It makes sense. Why would they send a probe in the first place? They kind of tipped their hand. There was no need for that assault. If they simply hadn't launched that probe in the first place and then continued doing testing in the Expanse and just turned up one day with their Death Star, Starfleet and Earth would have been none the wiser, and it suddenly would have just been gone. That would have been the smarter strategy, rather than give humanity a chance to deal with the threat. But, you know, whatever. Aliens go to aliens sometimes, right? Anyway, we are at the end of this video, and this little bit of speculation and fan theorizing about where the hell Starfleet was during the Xindi attack on Earth itself. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with it? Give me your alternative theories. I really like them. I've been recently rewatching Enterprise, and I finally reached the Xindi storyline arc, and once again watched the episode where they come in for the attack, and I'm like, where are you? This doesn't make any sense. It really plays into this. There's only one ship buzzing around the sector kind of theory that Starfleet sometimes plot conveniences away. But it simply doesn't hold any water in a real functioning universe because there is so much else going on. Even if they weren't human ships, where were the Vulcans? Where were all the military vessels? Where were all the other smaller starships? They couldn't possibly have deployed everything. Now there is some logic to say again about them being a bit further out, and because they're a bit slower, it took them too long to get back. I think that's plausible. It's just Earth did nothing. They had all that time to prepare, knowing the Xindi were coming, and they did nothing. They didn't build more ships. They didn't build orbital weapons platforms or orbital torpedo launch systems. Just basic, like, some kind of barrier, something. Now, yeah, it's possible that they did, but the Xindi weapon was simply too far away for those things to fire at. Maybe. But, you know, there are many questions there. Although it does lead into the idea that after this event, the Enterprise underwent a significant refit before going into the Expanse. More phaser cannons, enhanced armor, more hull plating, sensor improvements, power improvements, blah blah. And when the Columbia was under construction, it was deliberately built with these modifications and then some. 12% stronger polarized hull plating so they could last longer in a fight. They were armed not only with beam phasers, but also with pulse phaser cannons, similar to the Terran versions, I should point out, in the Mirror Universe. The Columbia was a significantly more tactically orientated vessel, and we see going forward, throughout the history of Starfleet, they might have their little bumps where they get a little complacent every now and again, but never again will Starfleet build little hippie starships with naive officers who go around the galaxy telling everybody where Earth is and think their only mission in existence is to seek out new life and new civilizations and just keep going around and introducing yourself and moving along without thinking someone's ever going to push back. Because that level of naivete, it was a lesson humanity had to learn fast. Because I've often thought Archer, especially in the early days, was far too naive. He was far too sort of thinking all the other alien races were going to be happy to meet humans. They were going to share their information. You were going to learn all about them and move on. But there was never going to be anything hostile. That everyone you meet would share your values. As Paul would put it, humans have a tendency to interfere and project onto others their own opinions and values, and before trying to really understand them. So there is an argument for the Vulcans' position if humanity simply wasn't ready because of the sheer level of naivete they had in going out into deep space. And a consequence of that was the anger on Earth when people directly confronted Starfleet over, did you not think it was maybe not such a good idea to go around telling everybody that you met where to find Earth? You were kicking over anthills. The Vulcans pointed out that the Enterprise got into multiple armed engagements. But Archer himself said to other Starfleet captains and officers who said the Enterprise should be more heavily armed. Bear in mind, I think this was Archer's first command. So these were other experienced officers. Again, taking us out of the small universe problem that Star Trek sometimes has, showing us there was other things already going on, ships already out there, with officers already doing these kinds of missions on a smaller scale, who were trying to warn Archer, it's more dangerous out there than what you think. And Archer's like, I don't want to make first contact with new races aboard the bridge of a warship. But Starfleet would go on and build ships like the Kirk's Enterprise that were basically a battle cruiser. Voyager is only a couple of jumps away from being a warship. The Enterprise E, goddamn, is a battle cruiser. Starfleet would never again build ships that were so naively built that they couldn't at least handle themselves in a fight. Defensive, offensive capabilities, shall we say, or offensively defensive technology, however you want to phrase it. Starfleet learned its lessons, and I think the Xindi War was a punishingly hard lesson for Starfleet to learn. Build defenses, keep a fleet close to home, have something in place, the Mars defense perimeter, things of that nature. Decentralize a lot of your assets and resources so they're not an easy target for an enemy. Have a robust intelligence network, have a robust communications and logistical system. Things that Enterprise was learning on the fly as it went out there that it was going to need. It needed help, it needed resupply, it needed to be rearmed, it needed to be refueled, it needed those things. And Starfleet at the time was not in a position to provide them because the Enterprise was the first ship. That was an extremely long tangent, I grant you, but I stand by my theory of where the hell was Starfleet during this? They still had enough ships and assets. They should have been there. They should have known it was coming. Again, lesson hard learnt. We're now at the end of this. Thank you for watching and bye-bye.